what it allows. Like, I'll go work remotely, or we'll take a few days off and, go drive around somewhere. We've traveled like to different countries together, and I've done that with multiple partners. Like, travel locally, travel different countries. So share all of these experiences to different degrees. There's conversations about like, buying property together, but not necessarily moving together. So again, it's not like, this is just the way things are. No, like, let's buy property together, but that doesn't mean she's going to quit her job and move in with me. No, it means like we'll share the space, and we'll have different arrangements than traditional couples might. And it is a commitment, but it's not like we have to talk about everything. They're like, you can't just assume or expect. There's a lot of discussing, and what's this going to look like, and what are we going to do, and we should establish some rules around what happens if we actually like split up, and how that's going to work.
And proactively having those conversations. How often are we willing to do that proactively, right? And kind of, I'm hearing that this lifestyle kind of forces us to have those upfront.
Yes.
And I also love that you said that, you are thinking about things like property, which are things that are on the relationship escalator, but I'm also hearing that partner already lives with someone else. So to buy property with someone that you're not living with is kind of not heard of in the monogamy world, right? And also, I think it's really bright in this economy. Let's be real. It all takes a village in this economy with this inflation to survive. And it's kind of brilliant in this economy. Let's be real. I'm sure some people are envious of that, village shared resource, dynamic too.
Yeah, we know of one of my partners, one of your metamours, was like they live in a triad, and all three of them are sharing a mortgage, which is a lot easier to pay.
Exactly.
than just two people. Yes.
Exactly. And so it's creative. It's a really creative way to live and to cohabitate, to also share intimacy. And it's not your standard, what you see on TV probably of, one person and these love triangles. Like, actually, I'm hearing a lot of work put in to consciously create what works for the unique dynamics.
Yes. And that's, you hit upon a good point earlier, which is ideally what every relationship should be doing is talking a lot, and talking often. Don't let it simmer. Don't let it boil. Don't wait until you explode. Don't go on like hunches or assumptions. Like, nobody's a mind reader. Nobody's even a great body language reader. Like, you have to speak up. As our common friend says, use your outer voice. Like, don't use your inner voice. Use your outer voice. Speak up. Say, something is making you feel uneasy, speak up about it. Something is you're not sure what it is yet, speak up about it. Like, you don't have to have set words or set ideas, just like share, communicate. That's better. Like, if you already wait until you're upset about something, that might be a little too late. But if you're not even sure, you have like weird feelings, that's the best time to like think, hey, you know what? This happened, you did this, and I was feeling this way, and I'm not sure what to make of it. And that's a great opportunity for the other person who's like, okay, let's think about that, or how did that make you feel? What was it that I did? But if you wait until you're already like upset, and it's like, I hate it when you do this. Well, if you hate it when I do this, why didn't you tell me before?
So I'm also hearing, because you're committed to multiple people, like, if you're not conscious and say you're, holding stuff in with one partner, it might bleed into your grumpy mood with someone else, or maybe even patterns could come up. So you might end up hearing it from multiple people. So I'm also hearing like it could force you to actually be more aware of our patterns or themes. Like, I'm even hearing like, maybe if you're complaining about or upset about the same thing with multiple people, maybe it's actually not them, it's you.
Yes. I think one of the things I'm most grateful about this journey into polyamory and non-monogamy is just how much it's helped me become a better person. It forces you to confront yourself. It forces you to face up, to own up, to really look inside, but you're not doing it alone. You're
Right.
doing it with other people, so you can bounce things off. Does this make sense? Am I the right? A lot of us go to therapy not because anything is wrong with us, just because it's a sounding board. It's you know, a person that can like help you just along different aspects of your life, dealing with this, dealing with that, pressures from work, things with kids if you have kids, whatever the issue is. But the whole, when I was monogamous, I was very much used to just holding things inside, not speaking up, you know, just taking it in, being a bit of a martyr, you know. Sometimes we're like, oh, like, you know, I'll just suffer in silence and stuff, like very unhealthy stuff, like very, very unhealthy. You don't want to do that. But that was like my habits, and I still occasionally fall on that as a bit of a knee-jerk reaction, where I don't want to speak up, I don't want to say something. And this journey has helped me be more open and but also honest with myself. And also just grow and develop my own empathy for others, understanding, dealing with emotions, dealing with complicated emotions. You know, instead of going on spirals, or instead of going like, no, I'm able to more recognize my own reactions, recognize my own triggers. So it has been just a great overall learning experience. And, you know, like, I don't think like, they don't, all these like non-monogamy books and polyamory books, they don't exactly like put them in the self-help. They're more about like relationship, but they could be just how much you learn about yourself, and how much you can improve as a person by going through all the motions. Like they should be self-help.
It's so true. I mean, you end up facing yourself quite a bit, don't you, in all these relationships, because it's like, if you can have uncomfortable conversations with one, imagine you need to have these uncomfortable conversations with more than one, like 2 or 3.
And it's not going to be the same conversation because it's a different person.
That's right. That's right. Exactly. And so you'd have to be sensitive to the different person's communication styles, what their triggers are, and pay attention. If you're not paying attention to one, like imagine trying to pay attention to 3 different people and their preferences and their quirks. You know, this is what, it does take a level of presence, is what I really hear.
And it takes up time, but it's a good comparison is not to compare with, for example, well, like, how would you ever want this or do this with more than one person? And it's like, think about your kids. You don't necessarily love one child more than the other. You don't say this one is better, best. You could say, oh, this one is more athletic. This one is really good at math. But you don't necessarily love one more than the other, or one is better than the other. And yes, the more kids you have, the more strained you'll be for like time and resources. But that doesn't mean you love them any less. You'll just have like less one-on-one time with them, and maybe like less money to go around. You know, resources are limited, times are limited. But you know, everybody has their own polysaturation level. You know, some people 1 or 2 and that's it. Some people, oh, they can have a dozen people, but again, some would likely be more close and intimate, and a few would be more chill. They're almost just like friends.
Exactly. I always love hearing people's origin stories. So tell me, how did you even start up in this space? And how many years later are we now from when you started into this space?
Ooh. Well, it's a good question, because a lot of it is, in hindsight, before the journey actually starts. So I moved to this city 10 years ago, 11, and you know, did what most people do who are single, go on sites to meet people, dating websites, Meetup, and all that. Came across something called like polyamory. Like, okay, what's that? Curious. Did digging and like, oh, that sounds interesting. Started reading articles, started reading books. They had like meetups and reunions where you would go. They even had like 101s, like introductory. They had panels, so they were great at like just teaching and educating people, helping the newbies, helping the people that are very like foreign to this. And I can't thank them enough for like doing that, because that took a lot for them to organize. And so when I had a few monogamous relationships in the beginning when I was living here, and I've been a serial monogamist my entire life. So when the last one ended, and I already had like a good sense or a good grip on like polyamory and non-monogamy, I said, I'm just gonna like, just jump into the deep end and try it out, see how that goes.
Because it spoke to you after like
it's like, you know what,
this and hearing people talk about
I don't want to after doing this just sounds so much more me, so let me try it out. And I did, and it's like, yep, like, oh yeah, I have no regrets. It's entirely my identity. It's like somebody coming out of the closet. It's like somebody accepting, oh, you know what, I'm gay, or you know what, I'm bisexual. It is very much that experience. Is like, oh, this has been me all along. I just didn't know it was an option.
What are some examples of, like, in hindsight, you're like, wow, I've always been a little bit on the non-monogamous side.
When I was a serial monogamist, there were several girls that I dated on and off. Like, we were dating, we were like in the same city, and then we like, okay, go back to our respective cities, and we'd date other people, but we'd stay in touch, and then we would break up and like, oh, let's get back together, and then okay, and then break up again, and again, very amicably, because mostly like geography that separated us, but then we'd stay together, we'd stay in touch, so we're never like actually cheating, we were just being friends, but whenever we didn't have a partner, we get back together repeatedly, and so
you're fluidly moving in and out of like different dynamics with the same person,
and we would both have partners and then break up and go. So that was very much like, in hindsight, it's like, oh, you never really stopped caring for this person.
That's a good word.
Like, you were always affectionate to this person. You just played within the rules.
Yes, right.
Like, okay, we can't use this language. We can't touch this way. But the caring, the affection for this person never went away.
And you made a conscious effort to stay in touch.
Yeah. And then when we had the opportunity, we would get back together. And so that is one of the best examples of like, oh, in hindsight, that makes a lot of sense. Where I was in a relationship with one person while still very much caring for another, while playing within the rules. Like, oh, you can't do this, you're not supposed to do this. But they were there. They never actually went away. So
I see.
That was something interesting that happened,
And how long would you say it took you before you felt like you got a hang of non-monogamy?
So I'm a bit of a geek and a nerd. I did do a lot of reading, a lot of like
honestly, study. As did I.
I did do a lot of like digging into what this did, all the all the blog posts and articles on like best practices, newbie mistakes, all these things. So I think like when I dove in my first rounds of relationships, we were like pretty good. I avoided a lot of like newbie mistakes. I like was cautious and aware of things to do, things not to do, things like that. But much like riding a bicycle, you can read all about it, but it's not until you're actually doing it
such an excellent point.
that you really know, okay, this is what it feels like, and this is also what it feels like for me. Like people can tell you and talk to you about balance, but it's not until you're on it that you feel like, okay, what your balance is like, what your, some people are top heavy, some people are bottom heavy. So similarly, some people
more athletic or less.
Some people have like more tolerance for some things, less for others. Some people care about things or don't care about things. So you have to like figure that out for yourself. And so as good as some of these early relationships were, I did make some mistakes that took a long time to discover. Like
what were your kind of your biggest myths that were shattered, and like breakdowns, and then lessons that you learned about yourself, and about this lifestyle,
one of the ones was in the beginning, because as you alluded to before, we do like going to play spaces, so we like
the sex parties sometimes,
we'll get more into that a little bit. But we do we like the exhibitionism, the voyeurism, those aspects. And so in the beginning, when my partners were with other people, I wanted to hear all the details, because it was a turn on. It was like, oh, it's like porn. It's like hearing about somebody else, knowing about this and that. It was a turn on. But at some point, it actually started turning it into the opposite of a turn on. It started being a triggering insecurities, triggering jealousy.
Right.
And so I've since learned that no, I actually don't need to know the details.
Right.
It's not a good idea for me to like know all the details. Like, I obviously I have to know if somebody is like having sex with somebody, and if they're like taking the proper precautions, you know, using protection, getting tested, and so on and so forth. But I don't really need to know all the details. And you know, some partners like sharing more than others. And at some point, I'm like, you know, I'll kind of like either tease more out if I want to hear more, or kind of like start like shutting them down if they're sharing a little too much. Before I get triggered, before I get, you know. Before some avalanche is unleashed. So that's one thing that I started one way and then realized, no, that's actually not how I like react. So I've learned better. And it could also not necessarily be like, I was this way and then I discovered I wasn't. People also change. Like I could have really been into it, but then stuff happened in my life and I'm no longer that into it.
And sometimes you also just realize like you care for it or you don't, or just where your edge is. And I'm also hearing like you were willing to take risks.
Yes.
And make a bit of a mess because, like you said, you don't really know until you're in it.
Yes, and I think I did take bigger risks than I do now, or my risks are different, and maybe I can explain this better. In the beginning, I also thought of very, like most people that are new to the space, like you have a lot of fantasies, you have a lot of expectations and ideas that are not necessarily grounded in reality, but that's what's been formed. Without the experience, this is kind of like what you imagine things are or could be or should be. And so there were a lot of things where I was a bit careless. We're like, well, we're polyamorous. This is what it's about. But there were times when some partners really needed a lot more reassurance from me, a lot more of me. Okay, they're feeling insecure and they need my attention. And instead I was like, well, no, this is polyamory. Like, you know, this is what it's like. We all date people. We are all over the place. And it took somebody doing the same to me so it was kind of like, it's a shame that happened, but it actually took somebody hurting me the same way I hurt somebody else for me to like learn my lesson. And then since then, I've taken extra steps to make sure I never repeat that. So I've been with partners that started off as monogamous, and then bringing along this journey is not something for everybody. Most people that are experienced do not want anything to do with like new people. It's a huge like emotional load to handhold somebody. It's not for everybody. I'm still keen. I enjoy that, but it definitely is not for everybody. But I did take those extra steps to make sure that these people that were very inexperienced had constant assurance, reassurance. As soon as something crept in, as soon as I could see that there was like doubt and hesitance, I would immediately like offer up, speak up, like, you know, and they've in turn learned to vocalize, you know, what they're feeling, what they're insecure. They've done a little bit of their own like research and how to deal with this. But I did like do 180, whereas like now I take extra efforts to make sure people are taken care of, that they don't feel what I felt, because I don't want that for anybody. And it takes a lot of effort. Ultimately, it's very rewarding. I'm in a place where most men would be jealous. I'm like, you know, seeing more people there are than days in the week. So like, that's like, you must be in paradise. Yes, but it's also an enormous amount of work.
And actually, so going back to your origin story, I'd love to know how you ended up with the multiple partners that you have now, but including the very like more enmeshed ones than the ones that you see, you know, on, you know, more occasionally. Yes, correct.
Yeah, it helps that some partners are more long distance, so I don't see them every week.
But how, like, you said the 8-year one, for example. That one.
It was an interesting story because I just gone through those several messy breakups from
Mhm.
my first round of polyamory. Let's call
Okay.
it that way.
So this is your second round of
Yes,
polyamory.
second round. Yes, and there were like messy breakups, a lot of like emotions hurt. So I did not want anything to do with relationships. I'm just gonna date around, and I don't want anything to do with the relationships. The first person that I started dating was such a sweetheart. She like warmed my heart and softened it up to the idea of actually building a relationship with them. But they were, I mean, they were not monogamous. They were dating other people. But they were not polyamorous.
Right.
So it did took a little bit of like conversations and understanding into like, well, what would this look like? Like I had more experience than they did. And so when feelings started happening, her expectation was the relationship escalator.
Right.
So there was a lot of like conversations to like reset expectations, but also provide reassurances. Like, oh, just because this is not going to happen doesn't mean I'm not going to care about you any less than that I would if it did.
And what is your living situation or like frequency or like of seeing her, and also I guess like how do you guys?
Yeah, it depends
on the same city?
Yeah, so yeah, live in the same city, fairly close to each other, so we see each other pretty much every week unless something happens.
And she has her own space.
Yeah, she has her own space with roommates and all that.
Okay.
That's like this arrangement works for us. We both like our own private time with ourselves and space. There's no desire to move in with each other. But we've been a very like loving, deeply committed relationship for like years. We've like she's traveled home to meet my parents multiple times. I've met her parents multiple times. So it's like those parts of the escalator.
Yeah. So I hear like picking the parts that feel relevant to you.
Yeah, spend Christmas together, stuff like that. And then another partner I met at an event, and we really hit it off. And she was not experienced with, but very curious because of a friend to like try polyamory. She also felt very identified by it. It was also a learning curve, but she was already like willing and into it. Right. And still a learning curve.
Like looking for it.
Yeah, because again, her family more traditional. So, the whole like talking about feelings and stuff is a little bit foreign, but like, very much into putting the effort in and like following the motions, which are like healthier and better ways of like having relationships and building relationships. And we both multiple times recognizing we're not perfect, we still make mistakes, we still trip up, we still do things we know we shouldn't, but in that moment you just go on reflex, go on your habits. Same story. I've met her parents, she's met mine. Spending Christmases together. And then, and I've met several people like that. A few years later, met somebody else, and I guess something that I find is very different from the way other people date is that all of these people, I never set out, I want to find a partner.
Right.
Like I was never goal oriented. Like I want a partner. I need a partner. I feel lonely. Like no, I enjoy meeting people. I enjoy dating
and seeing what might happen. I guess
see
in the
what might
connection.
happen. So I've gone on a lot of dates, have been and still are, and all of these relationships in a sense happen organically, where we really clicked, we really liked each other, we like spending time with each other, and as time goes on, feelings develop, and so we eventually like gravitate closer and closer and closer, and some people that never happens. So I'm still dating them, I'm still seeing them, but that level of affection, that level of closeness just doesn't happen. Sometimes that's even because of like geographic distance, where like, we can't see each other that often, so there's not even an opportunity for that to develop. But for others, it did develop, and then distance came between. But you know what? We're still interested in that.
So that was your second partner. The second partner that showed up. She originally you met here in the city, but now she's like moved out of the city and is like a little bit further out.
Yeah, exactly. And the interest is still to retain the closeness of the relationship, even if it's not physical closeness.
And then so that's the one that you are in video games with weekly. And you make an effort to either come down here or for her to come down here, you go up there. And she's living with someone else. Up north.
Up north.
Up north, pretty much. Okay. And then, so that was the second partner, both of those people, you've met their parents, and there's like
Mhm.
some relationship escalator things that have happened, but it's more like pick and choose what works
Yeah.
for you guys.
Yeah, for everybody. And that's kind of like the same thing too we were talking about, like these are all different